want to start by thinking, again, proportionate to positioning at the beginning, the people in the room, and going back to what we set out to achieve with this forum. On the DC side of our industry, as you know, we are all decision influencers and decision makers on behalf of members that are, in many cases, blissfully unaware of the fact that actually, if we make suboptimal decisions, we are not as impacted as they are. So we, as Old Mutual, we then made a decision to say, yes, there's no shortage of these forums, but we believe the people in the room today, the regulators, government, labor, the largest employers are in the room today, the largest consulting and advisory houses are in the room today. We were of the view that if we come into a room, look at what data and insights are telling us, leverage deep expertise in the industry, focus ourselves on the right things, and then work together to prioritize tangible solutions, that hopefully our forum over time is going to be much more meaningful than what is out there. So that is important. We will reflect very, very quickly on what has been covered so far. And then we'll open it up to everyone else. So maybe we can start with Adrian's session. There was a presentation. What some of you may not know is there's a publication as well where all of the speakers are also covered in the publication. A few things on Adrian before I ask my panelists to respond to some of that. So he spoke about the six-pack. In the publication, you've all received the publication. In the publication, he then summarizes three practical priorities for South Africa. One is savings and investments, where he's saying, and there are a number of things that to me were really, I took to heart. He says, unequal societies tend to behave as consumption frameworks. When you live in an unequal society, you have to provide evidence that you are worthy through displays of material wealth and well-being. He then talks about what he covers as well, that learning behavior is, that savings behavior is learned, and it doesn't matter how much you earn, it doesn't matter what the tax status is. These are behavioral issues. That's the one thing that you'll find in the pack. The other thing that he covers in the publication is on, the other theme is private-public partnerships, where he says there is no country that has transitioned without effective public-private partnerships. I found that quite powerful. And then he talks about the other theme, the other priority for South Africa about labor, investing in labor-absorbing sectors. So again, we've got asset managers here. You've got asset consultants. You've got employers. So those were my key takeaways from at least the publication and presentation part of Adrian's session. I'd like to start with Chris. Talking about people that can solve our problems, Chris says policy. Astrid implements it, and there's power there. You've got someone who's accountable at a National Treasury level, as well as on the Astrid side. Shafiq and myself and the rest of us here, we are decision influencers, we're decision makers. So keen to hear his views as well on the Adrian side. Starting with you, Chris, from a National Treasury perspective, as you guys are planning for the future in terms of policy and priorities, what were your big takeaways from the Adrian part of the conversation?
No, thanks very much, and morning, everyone. So I don't set policy, I advise the minister. And the minister makes the decision, as the previous minister knows, sitting there. So, a lot of the six-pack, it resonates. It's what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve savings. Although tax incentives might not do the most work, we've got them there anyway. Tax-free savings accounts, retirement fund deductions. We want to improve savings. even as a government, we're trying to reduce the amount we borrow so that as, we have national savings to try and get that budget deficit down. So that's clear. Demography, Treasury can't really help. Policy and institutions, linking back to trying to be reasonable, we try so hard as Treasury not to throw out unreasonable policies that creates uncertainty, that might reduce growth, reduce investment. We need to be sensible. And then also have strong institutions. So we work hard as Treasury to be strong, to help our other institutions as well. There was that saying, I can't remember which American president said it about, if you want to know policies, don't read speeches, look at the budget. And education and health are really where all the money goes. It goes into those. So we firmly aligned with those like principles in the six-pack. We don't get as much in terms of outcomes from that money that we spend there. And I think that's the issue. So it's, as Treasury, we put a lot of cash there, but you need to see improvements in those education and health outcomes, as well as openness. So it's a great framework in terms of looking at what we need to do, and it's quite daunting in terms of the challenges that we face, but we're going to keep trying and use those. The one thing I didn't quite agree with was the Bolsa de Familia. I mean, we've looked at that a lot as well, and it's been hugely successful in Brazil. But then there's also other research about, if you need to assist, you just give cash. You don't put conditions on cash. So it's like gamification of the grant system. That is something we need to look at, and we've sort of gone the other way. But anyway, that's sort of my takeaways, and it's a very useful presentation. The last point was about that initial stage of 0 to 3 years and early childhood development. And in the budget, it was a difficult year this year with all the budgets, but a lot of what we were trying to do was raise money for early childhood development. We had allocated 10 billion to that, to get more food for children at that lower end. We spend a lot of money on fee-free higher education, but actually you need that early childhood development to be much more supportive, to then get everybody a chance to go further on in life. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Astrid, from your perspective, same question? Takeaways from Adrian?
Well, I think, Professor Saville really confirmed the need for us to focus on savings and investment. To me, that was a key takeaway. And obviously, I wear a particular hat from a regulatory perspective. So, and I think that, that's really what the discussion today is about, I think, for me, certainly, is how do we nationally develop a roadmap to achieve those kind of savings levels.
Okay. And Shafiq, you run one of the largest retirement funds. It's a DB fund, over 200 billion in assets. Any reflections on the Adrian presentation?
Yeah, no, thanks, Humphrey. Let me start by congratulating the Old Mutual team for framing and staging this conversation, and I have no doubt it'll spur us into action. And when I reflect both on Professor Saville and Paul's presentations, there's much we can resonate on. I do think as a country, we need to elevate the savings discussion. We all aligned on the need to create jobs, to grow the economy, to create those jobs, but the enabler is the savings. Now, as retirement saving, and while we get into that 25%, we need to accept that there's about 5 trillion in the retirement savings environment, maybe 10% of what Paul and his country has. But we need to think differently about how we leverage those savings. At EPPF, our philosophy has always been, this is workers' capital. We live in South Africa, live in communities. And yes, retirement outcomes are critical. And so risk, return, and cost has always been a traditional focus. But we can extend that lens to sustainability and impact. And you can find the sweet spot on all of it. So it's not either or, it's all of that, because we have to pay pensions at the end of the day. And through the years, we focused our areas around 3 elements. How do we invest in a way that drives social justice, whether it's transformation in the industry, transformation through our assets? How do we deal with spatial injustice through township and rural economies, so supporting township economies, rural malls? as well as addressing the environmental justice issue and the climate change challenge through renewable energies, etc. As we stand, I can tell you that our investment targets have all been met on all of the targets of the 1 to 10 year numbers, and we're 150% funded after contingency. So it can be done.
Yeah.
The question is, where is new growth going to come from and new investment going to come from? We believe the Transmission Development Plan is a critical project for the country. And we can, once again, support it with local confidence in domestic investors, through investment, domestic investment, but also help unlock foreign capital to come in. So I think there's lots of good work that's been done, but we need to put shoulder to the wheel and put our money where our mouths are now and back these projects.
Thank you. Thanks, Shafiq. I want us to move to the question of leakage. If you can put up the slide, please. I want us to reflect on this picture. So the three or four lines at the bottom, that is today's world, the pre-two-pot world. On average, an average member in a fund, they have about 2 years worth of savings, essentially. Post two-pot, our estimate says we expect that to move from about 2 or 3 to about 9 times. So that is what we see as the power of two-pot. There's still a lot of work to be done. The 14, is it 14 times? The 14 times line, that is if they don't access the savings part. I just want us to reflect on where we are with two-pot. I know, Chris, you've been saying to me, Humphrey, there's still a lot of work behind the scenes that we still need to do. But to me, this is an example of what we can do as an industry, the people in this room, if we work together to really start to materially lift where the industry is and where it needs to go. Chris, I'll just very, very quickly, where are we, maybe let's start with Astrid, sorry. Where are we with two-pot? Any highlights so far? Anything under the hood that we're not aware of? From your vantage point, what are you seeing that the guys in the room today need to have an eye on, to keep an eye on?
Well, I think you've made the obvious point, or one that we all aware of, is how successful the implementation of it was, and that is because it was this collective effort between all the parties: industry, labor, regulators, policymakers. So, and I think that has created a platform for the implementation of future reforms. The overall of the preservation win, I think the other points I wanted to highlight that two-pots delivered. I think it's delivered quite a major modernization of the infrastructure. I think our estimates are there's been an investment of about 1.6 billion. 1 billion of that was in technology. So I think that's quite significant, and I think, again, that's something that's enabled better member engagement and better service to members. It's made their savings more accessible to them. And I think that's the second big contributor or big win for us as a country from the two-pot is the increase in member engagement. Everybody, I even did it, had a look at what's in the savings pot, what you could access. And I think that's generated a whole new level of awareness and something that I think we should build on. So I think for me, one of the key things is how do we build on financial education, financial literacy going forward. And then I think the third thing that over the last few days, I've thought about, or that occurred to me, is that we've seen some consolidation as a result of 2.2. And that, I think, just shows how organic consolidation can be, but also how reform pushes it forward. It creates new decision points, for example, for standalone funds. If they're not able to deliver the same service, that's what we saw, a lot of standalone funds transferring to umbrella funds, people changing administrators because now they're looking at, who's offering us the best, who's offering our members the best service. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Ashwin. Shafiq, in your world, slightly different to the DC space, but just with its own complications. Where are you guys there? Any nuggets?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think Two-Pot, like as it says, I think it was a good learning point for the industry, how you can collaborate. Yes, at times it felt like we were moving forward and we were building the car as we were going along with it, right? But we got there, and I think as an organization and as a retirement fund, the most important takeaways is we now have better engagement with our members. Members, instead of waiting for the date of retirement to engage us, now have more reason to engage us. 2, we can do better education and training and get closer to the communication part of it. And I think the benefits of preservation are coming. It's coming, and that will be compounded. Yep. And at the organizational level, what we found is our resilience and our ability to deploy technology got tested as well. So we're much more confident going forward as an organization to deal with many more technological projects as well of this nature.
No, thank you. Thank you for that. I want us to move to the theme of consolidation. It's usually very topical. So if you can move to the next slide, please. Paul presented this slide on the left-hand side. That's the Australia picture of consolidation. On the right-hand side is the number of active funds across South Africa. Chris, when it comes to consolidation, can you touch on the regulator's standpoint here, and how we then manage consolidation while balancing the themes of inclusion and the like. But maybe before you answer that question, maybe let me go to, where's Paul? Is Paul still here?
Yes.
So I'll start with Chris. Maybe then I'm going to go to Paul. I'm keen for us to then unpack for us in Australia. How did you guys quantify and measure economies of scale, and what other lessons have come from that? What nuggets you can share with us on that? But maybe let me start with Chris from a policy standpoint, where you guys stand, just for clarity.
No, thanks. I mean, our position is pretty similar to what it was a long time ago. We agree with consolidation. We would like better outcomes for members. Okay. The assumption there is that costs should go down per member, and that is what we want. Part of what Two-Pot was trying to do was to say, now it really is only 2 pots going forward. So there should be no difficulty being able to consolidate accounts. Yes, there are the vested accounts, and all the different funds will need to deal with the vested accounts and put them in the background. But going forward, it should be there are only 2, and they are the same. And you can transfer between the 2 easily. Previously, you couldn't transfer from retirement annuity to a provident. Then there's provident preservation, then pension preservation. I mean, it was complicated and difficult. This should hopefully be simpler, and it would help with the consolidation. And just to get the best outcome, I liked Paul's view of the net benefit, because it's not just about the costs. You could have an ETF in the fund that is incredibly low cost, but if you're getting bad returns, what's the point? So it's a nice way of looking at it, and we're worried about the best outcomes for members.
Okay, and I'm keen later for us to touch on the pipes to enable some of the things that you're talking about. Sorry, Paul, I'm keen for your outside-in view on the concept of economies of scale and whether they've ever been realized in the Australia space.
Thanks. I think one of the interesting points I probably didn't make about the consolidation journey was that up until the performance test in the early 2020s, we had another test that our regulator applied to our funds annually, and it was a scale test. So annually you had to square off with the regulator and submit effectively an assessment, which you got to conduct yourself, to convince the regulator that you had appropriate scale to continue to operate in the market to deliver what your strategy was, etc. No fund that I know of ever failed the scale test. Irrespective of whether you were Australian super, which is the largest single fund in Australia, or a very tiny fund back here. So the scale test was ineffective, and everyone passed the scale test. We then sort of moved to the introduction of a member outcome assessment, where think of it almost like a balanced scorecard, where as a fund, you had to describe how your size and scale was being deployed to reduce the cost to serve, so be that administration fees or in your investment fee budget, and how that was delivering net benefit outcome to members. So we've never had a number in mind in Australia in terms of, on what side of that number do you have scale and you don't have scale. Interestingly, other jurisdictions have taken a different approach. The UK, as it stands today, have actually said to their pension industry, by 2030, you must reach $25 billion in funds under management. Now, at that point, so they actually have nailed a number to the mast. They've said 25 billion pounds is the number where we feel you will have sufficient scale going forward. If you think you're going to struggle but get close to that number, let's have a conversation. We might give you a little bit of leeway. But effectively, funds are now meeting and trustee boards are looking at that deadline and actively making decisions now about if we don't think we're going to make that, we need to start speed dating with other funds in terms of merger opportunities and the like. And I think that was the case in Australia in terms of it didn't really need a lot of regulatory nudge or nailing a number to the mast. It was more a case that as governance standards were lifted and more focus was put on member outcomes, that trustees, good fiduciaries, saw the writing on the wall and decided our best job for our members is actually to look at how we can move them along to a different situation, maybe a merger or a different fund for their future trajectory. So I hope that sort of helps with a bit of the scale discussion.
Okay. No, thank you. And then I wanted to transition to the final theme, which is coverage and what's next. If we can put up the next slide, please. Based on what we've heard today, or what has been covered so far, I'm keen for reflections from you guys, and Paul did put his own suggested next steps and set of priorities. I'm keen to understand from the South Africa perspective, what is next? What are the next priorities? Starting with Chris, included in that specifically is the concept of mandatory coverage. I'm keen to get a sense of where are we in our thinking around that. And then just broadly, when we meet next year this time, what would you have spent the last 12 months focusing on? Thanks, Chris.
Thanks. Maybe in an effort to follow Bruce's lead and make everybody uncomfortable, there are a couple of things. So the one is on two pots, and it's not done from our perspective.
Yeah.
There's something that worries us and worries me a lot is, if someone has used up all their savings pot, they've lost their job, they've sold their assets, they're 45, they've got no other job left, and they'll have nothing. And South Africa doesn't have a very strong safety net, a social security safety net. So you might have somebody who's left with 400,000 in their retirement pot, but they've got nothing else. There is a very valid case to say, but they should have some access to that retirement pot. But now if you allow that access, you might be completely undermining the two-pot system. So we need to have this discussion because it is going to happen at some point in the future and we don't want them to rush it. But is it something we have lots of conditions But then if you do that, it's very administratively difficult. But maybe in this new digital era, we could, but that is a discussion, an uncomfortable discussion we're going to have to have. The other one is on this mandatory contribution. So, I mean, we've always said we are supportive of exploring auto-enrollment. And that's the first one where you're not forcing it on people, you're just putting them as the default, you're changing the default. And a lot of what our previous retirement fund reform was about changing the default, and then people don't move, they don't change anyway, so at least then they're in and they start to save more. If you have mandatory contributions, the other uncomfortable question is, do you need a tax incentive if it's mandatory? Probably not. But that's something that you would have to think about as well. So the auto-enrollment, is really what we would look at next, and then think about these. But the overall goal is to improve the savings, and we must see what we need to do to get there.
Okay. Is that it? So for the next 12 months, we need to wrap up Tripod. There are aspects of it that are still not, that have got limited utility where it's actually required. We need to figure that out, as well as then the mandatory piece in terms of what platforms are we covering that?
Yeah, auto-enrollment versus mandatory. I think mandatory is a discussion you have but then auto-enrollment is a good first start.
Okay.
A lot of companies and large formal sector companies do it anyway. How do you do it for SMEs? You've got to look at the incomes of the employees that you have there. It would be a useful start. The mandatory, you might have to do it you could explore doing it at a much lower level. But it would be a new type of system. And where do those mandatory contributions go? That is the other big question.
Auto-enrollment, then I'm hearing you saying you're leaning towards some form of auto-enrollment?
That would be the first step, in my view.
In terms of that coming to life, what will need to be true?
Well, I think we would have to discuss. I mean, you have to discuss with industry, you have to discuss with others. A lot of companies, it wouldn't be difficult for them because they do it anyway. So it would just be sort of a change in perspective. It's about what procedures can you put in to make sure that they do. If they don't auto-enroll, what are the penalties? It was useful to listen to Paul about using the tax system as the stick to get everybody to start the superannuation. Do you do that? We're not trying to be too forceful in it because it's, people could opt out if they would want to, but you're just trying to change those defaults. And then how strict are you with employers, if they're not putting those defaults in? So those are things we're going to have to do. We've spoken about it for a while. We'll have to start doing work to see what we need to do to actually start implementing something like that.
Thanks, Chris. Astrid, your reflections?
I'm going to come back to the mandatory auto-enrollment discussion because we're the regulator, we're the implementer, not the policymaker, but I will be unreasonable and express a personal view on it.
Okay.
I think what we need to do in anticipation of the next reforms, we need to start working on those middle 3 points. The building the digital infrastructure and a central registry, strengthening preservation and portability, and I think that needs to be underpinned by expanding financial education. So for me, those are the immediate points.
Okay.
I don't think that we need legislative reform for those. Those are things that we can work together with industry and social partners on to get something implemented. On the mandatory, just to make the panel slightly uncomfortable, my personal view, this is not an FSCA view, is that we should seriously consider mandatory contributions for the formal sector. As Chris said, maybe implemented differently, smaller mandatory contribution for employers. Think about whether there should be a mandatory contribution for employees and how do we ratchet it up. And then it can be within a range. It doesn't need to be, it shouldn't be limited. So let me pause there.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll debate some of these things also offline. And then lastly, going to Shafiq. So same question, but I want to add to your question. Talking about what's next. We were chatting yesterday, and then you're saying there are some moves that you're making in your space from a DB perspective. And then you said, is DC even the future? And then we ended up talking about CTC. So I'm keen, same question, and then your perspective on a construct like CTC.
Yeah. So I will support Astrid. I think as retirement fund service providers, we can do a lot more in terms of financial literacy, inclusion, raising the savings discussion, and simplifying the game of savings. I think it can be very complicated. And I think as we do this, we must become much more flexible and dynamic in innovating products that meet the requirements of our members. And far too often, we caught on either DB and DC. And we understand that DB there's been a big drive away from DB because of the balance sheets of employers to individual savings. But we also have to learn from the COVID events and the impacts on workers after 40 years of working for employers, and then you're on your own when your retirement savings are down. And the beauty of DB has been that solidarity and pooling effect. That shouldn't be lost in our creation of new models. And I think as the world revives on CDC, UK now with next generation, I think we believe there's something in the middle. Okay. That we can have the best of both worlds. We can protect our members, particularly through a solidarity or pooling effect, and also have the upside of a DC. As we can have not use the power of and, rather than either or. And I think South Africa needs to move a little bit more faster in adopting those models and supporting it as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we've run out of time. I think the two gents are coming up.
Paul's about to see South Africa in action. I'm about to take a figurative hand grenade and just toss it into the conversation. Is it possible? And it's an unfair and unkind and unreasonable question, Chris. Is it possible to have compulsory savings in South Africa with this government in charge? And I ask this question because it will be billed as prescribed assets in disguise. Is it possible to get over that hump? Because it will be the first obstacle that we face. Look, we agreed that prescribed assets are inevitable. Can it be done in the next 5 years? Or do we have to bide our time?
No, well, it depends where the money goes. I mean, so, in the UK, they have Nest, and it'll go into a government fund with compulsory savings. But in Australia, they don't. They can choose their own funds. So it's compulsory, but it can go into your own. So I think that is one of the big questions. But in terms of whether you can and try and make it compulsory or mandatory, I think everybody agrees you need more savings.
You have no choice, surely.
Yeah, so you probably can try and move to that. The fight is over. Who gets to control it?
Yes. And knowing what you know about working within the constraints of government, is this a 5-year program? Is it a 10-year program? Because as Adrian mentioned earlier, countries that are successful were once poor, implemented savings, got themselves on the road sooner rather than later. Surely this is an emergency situation. We need to push this through quite actively and aggressively.
Optimistically, 5.
Optimistically 5, so more likely 10, possibly 15.
But it's, government can move quickly at times. But it's, also you don't want to make too many changes too quickly. The industry is probably a victim of its own success with a two-part system, though, because they said they would never have enough time, and they did it all very well, very quickly. So, in that sense, if we tried to do it as government and you get pushback, but it'll take 5 years implementation. Now we can say, well, let's push you a bit and push you a bit harder. So it could potentially be done sooner, but it's about getting that agreement, getting everybody around the table to agree. The two-part system worked because everybody agreed. This sort of thing is, you need that agreement, you need those discussions first, and then it can roll out quite quickly.
Shafiq, if you were to propose this to members of the Eskom Pension Fund, how would they feel?
Yeah, look, definitely there is a trust deficit that we have to deal with, and I think when Paul, in your thought leadership, you talk about industry leaders taking the lead rather than policy makers Right. And I think that's the challenge for us, is that we need to frame this conversation because we have the relationship with the members. We have the governance that we manage. Right? And I think industry has to start having a louder voice in shaping these, enabled by policymakers as well. Yeah.
Could you pull it off in 5 years, Humphrey?
I don't know the workings of government. I can talk about the private sector.
Oh, absolutely. Could you pull it off as
Yes.
somebody, as one of the biggest investors in the private sector? Could Old Mutual pull off mandatory savings, get the structures in place within 5 years? Is it even feasible?
Not by Old Mutual itself. I don't think so. So what we learned with Tuport recently is when our interests are aligned, we can move things. We had the small issue of the election that was coming. That, in my view, this is not an Old Mutual view. This is my view. That, in my view, that context, that environment forced all of us to have one goal, one interest, a firm deadline.
We like nothing other than a shared burning platform. So we perform very well. We need to have another World Cup or something and then put this into the mix for that, and it'll get through. It'll absolutely get through. Astrid, 5 years. Reasonable, unreasonable?
I think 5 years is
Doable.
reasonable, yeah.
Okay, so 3. Excellent. Thank you, Astrid. Okay, now, let's put you on the spot, Paul. You're standing between us and lunch, and that's a dangerous place to be. Australia's tax office, a question from the audience, thank you, seemed to play a big role in the pipes and wires required by the industry. What is needed for South Africa? Who should lead it? So if we're looking at a 5-year time horizon, this is my imposition on the panel. It may not be realistic. What are the first steps to make sure that it works successfully in an environment with low trust, with plenty of barriers and arguments against as to why it can't work? We know it must. 1 or 2 things we need to do to make it work.
Just picking up on a couple of the points there. The creation of SuperStream, which was those pipes and wires, was a near-death experience moment in the Australian pension system, which, by that I mean, the regulators and government stepped in and said to the industry, to the thought leaders in the industry, heal thyself. This is unacceptable. We can certainly do our bit to make policy changes and to create the playing field for change, but you, the industry, have to make it happen. And we stood on a burning deck. They gave us 18 months to come up with the plan, the blueprints, and the roadmap to fix that issue. Let me tell you, 2 weeks later, we met in a hotel somewhere in Australia. All the people in the industry who were stakeholders, the administrators, the pension funds, the custodians, the investment asset consultants, everyone realised that this was a fight or flight moment. And so to that point, it was industry-led, but it was with that nudge, if I could call it that politely, from both policy and regulatory, that it was unacceptable, and we would not get to where we were going if we allowed this proliferation of small accounts and the inefficiencies of that to continue. So then, in concert or in partnership with the enabler, and the enabler being the taxation office, we set up working groups and parties, and we built SuperStream. And then off the back of SuperStream, we came up with the momentum from that was then lent into some of the other reforms we talked about. So I hope that answers your question. So I think it should be industry-led, because if it's not, don't wait for it to be foisted on you, because it might be not a solution that you're necessarily comfortable with. So self-medicate, if I could put it that way. Just quickly on the time frame.
Oh, no, of course you can.
We introduced that 3% productivity benefit, which was effectively almost like an opt-in in the mid-80s. 7 years later, we introduced super guarantee, compulsory super. So that was a 7-year time frame. But it would not have happened, when I was thinking back as you were discussing it, if we didn't take the momentum from that 3% productivity benefit and get the band back together to say, this isn't quite working, we need to take this to another level. So thinking about that, I think the great momentum you've got from the two-pot approach and what had to come together and be discussed and distilled and sorted out to get that to happen, my other sort of gratuitous counsel would be, don't lose the momentum. Harness that energy, harness that light on the hill approach from the whole industry, And you could tackle some of those issues that I had in there as considerations to think about, whether it be continuing preservation, whether compulsory versus auto-enrolment or a segmented version of that might be the approach, the education side, et cetera, et cetera. Don't lose your momentum. That's what I'd say there.
A match. Petrol, Chris, it's your moment. Set the platform alight. Panel, thank you very, very much indeed. Please could you give our panel a very warm round of applause, and you are free to go, panel. Thank you very much indeed.